Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Trillionaire Crypto Chat podcast. Now, this morning for me, evening for our guest, we have Anthony Diaz. Anthony is a founder and innovator working at the intersection of decentralized agentic AI, which he's going to explain to us what that means, and real-world assets, RWA. Over the past decade, Ant has led groundbreaking initiatives in currency, wellness tech, and digital infrastructure, building platforms that have reached millions of people. As the founder and CEO of GoSmartChain.AI, Anthony's reimagining blockchains as social infrastructure, restoring transparency, ownership, and dignity to communities who have been excluded from legacy systems. Ant champions distributed leadership and collective restoration, designing tools that empower people to reclaim ownership over their health, wealth, and future. Mate, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
So do you want to explain to us decentralized agentic AI? I think a lot of people have had a bit of a chat with ChatGPT and they think, oh yeah, I know AI. It just talks to me about my feelings or it talks to me about how to operate a spreadsheet. But what's agentic AI?
Yeah, so if you've ever communicated with an AI bot, it answers your questions. It's helping you with one singular thing or whatever you're talking to it with at the time. Agentic is more about how it interacts with other AI agents, but more importantly, it takes initiative. That's the main difference, right? It's taking initiative, it's doing actions on your behalf. It's doing actions that you maybe didn't even think about doing, and so when you look at a task, typically our brains have been, I got to solve this problem, I got to answer this question. But at the end of the day, you have in your head, you're trying to accomplish something much, much more larger, something longer term. And that's why you're asking the question, right? Mm-hmm. So AI agentic is more about, here's the end goal in mind, and here's some other things you should be doing, thinking, asking along the way. And it's creating new pathways, new ways of acting, new ways of maneuvers to get to where you need to go faster. And then you have a chain of AI agents that are doing a whole set of tasks to help you get to achieve your goal even faster, ideally while you sleep. So, yeah.
So achieving the goal, like let's say I want to book a holiday. I've got to find out about the hotel. I've got to find out about the airlines and things like that. I know I can use the AI, like I can use ChatGPT or Grok or Claude or one of those things to find me the best deals closest to where I'm going. But does the agent actually jump on the phone and make the booking for me?
Yeah, now agents can go to different browsers. They're agent browsers now, agentic browsers that actually will click on things. They will look at different scenarios. They'll suggest different routes, obviously, for that you should go. What are the best times? It'll calculate all the different permutations and combinations of weather experiences. Oh no, it's Labor Day weekend, which obviously it is, here. Yeah. You probably don't want to hit the road at this time. You probably want to start coming back at this time. You probably actually want to have your Labor Day weekend before Labor Day weekend or after. That's the best time to probably have it, right? So yeah, going to different browsers, making different phone calls. And, at the end of the day, the technology is there, but it's more about a human trust factor that we're stuck at right now. It's like, do we really want this thing clicking on different browsers, filling in things, filling in forms, giving it our credit card numbers and all of these things? So right now it's really more of a trust thing. It's a societal, it's the artisanal aspect of we're used to holding our credit card. We're used to actually hitting the send button. And as we start to build more and more trust on that, you'll start to see more autonomy happen and really agentic experiences start to take over a little bit more. So we're getting there. But it seems like every other 2 or 3 weeks, I'm sure you're seeing a new agentic browser or AI browser pop up. And we think they're extremely valuable, but that's the crux of it. What we do is, agentic AI is not just about agentic AI, but it's really about what's the underlying value of what it's connected with. So we think that assets, we think that value and intelligence have a huge cross-section and intersection. A lot of people forget that the person that owned and started OpenAI also owns WorldCoin as well, which is scanning your eyeballs and giving you coins as well. So, the true OG, AI system, has a, sister company that is crypto related, and they do go hand in hand. So, and I can love to elaborate on that, obviously, if possible. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own views on getting shot in the eye with a laser beam, but more importantly, I'm just thinking, like, I've got 3 kids. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, which of my children would I trust with my credit card and say, go and book that airline for me, but try not to buy yourself an expensive watch or handbag on the way home.
Right.
So it's possibly, obviously, any new technology is going to be scary. Whether it's an Amish person getting into a car, or whether it's most of us who are introduced to AI, a couple of years ago for the first time. But I think trusting the AI with your credit card and making the bookings is another thing entirely. I mean, I know myself in Australia, I tried to book a flight from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast, but there's actually a Brisbane and a Sunshine Coast in Canada. So I found some very, very cheap flights online. I was about to book them and went,
Yeah.
hang on, I've never heard of that airline. What's going on?
Right.
I was booking flights in another country. So how advanced is the technology? When do you think we could actually trust it more than we trust our own children?
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology is there. It's about, how much we're ready for it, and the paradigm that's going for. So if you look at the open screen for most of the AI browsers or AI tools right now, we have open, Chat GPT, Gemini, you got so many out there. What can I help you with? Right. That's the number one question. That's the key prompt, right? What can I help you with? And so, you're seeing the new experience more about, what are you trying to accomplish? What's your end goal? It's really pulling, full blown consultant on your life and really start with there, and then how can we work our way back? And so when it's giving you a set of experiences to click on, would you pull up that browser? Would you like me to pre-fill out the application? Would you like me to pre-fill the PDF? So that's there. That's been there in ChatGPT for a while. But yeah, you're starting to see the technologies that are out there right now. And then more importantly, there's this concept, and obviously it was coined by an engineer at OpenAI, but vibe coding or vibe building, right? This concept of, applications now that can be built just by what you type, right? So the days of having to code applications, the days of having to know in-depth code or UX or design are not there. You just go with the flow and based on what you're trying to accomplish. And now AI is creating these applications. And so, what we like to think we're bringing to the table at Go is not just a layer one ZKM or a layer one blockchain, which is called GoSmartChain.AI for the space, centered around real world assets. What we believe is most important is bringing a tool set to allow anyone to vibe build or vibe code assets, right? So what's the value behind a system? And if you can tie value behind a system and you unlock hundreds of developers like we already have, and you allow those developers and builders and just anyone, that is interested in building and connect their inclination to solve a problem and build an application without knowing how to code and connect that with an asset. We think that that's the level of innovation that's needed to really unlock not just agentic experiences, but agentic commerce, right? And that's what we think is missing in the space, Jeremy. So this Thanksgiving, we hope that everyone's talking around the table about owning tokens in asset categories that are pretty cool, pretty fun, like agriculture, real estate, exotic cars, treasury bills, equities, things that are high yield. The days of us going to bed and not having an asset portfolio that has at least a 5 to 15% rate of return on it, it's out there, right? And it's a matter of, can assets be smart? Can a portfolio be smart? Can it optimize itself? Why wouldn't an asset want to think, talk, listen to another asset and be an agent in itself? And maybe the agent needs to raise its hand and say, hey, I'm an AI agent for a piece of land. And, I'll be more valuable if you put an ice cream shop on top of me, or I'll be more valuable if you put a laundromat on top of me. And by the way, I have this piece of land over here, but 2 miles down the road, hey, owner, I just saw that there's a laundromat for sale and a storage warehouse for sale, and you should grab that while you're at it too. And my calculations would say over the next 3 years, here's your extra yield on that if you were to do that, right? So, you get 100, super rich people in the room, millionaires, billionaires. Everyone's rich in the room, but is everyone really going to bed at night with an optimized portfolio? Still so much subjectivity, and we think that subjectivity needs to be drawn out the market. You need simple, fun, rewarding experiences. So yeah, that's what we mean when we're talking about agentic. The technology is there. And enabling just really innovators to not just build applications. We think building applications got commoditized already. We're already there. There's no magic in tokenizing, as you and I know. It's about regulations. It's about licensing. It's about proof. It's about actuary. It's about sort of like the same thing that you and I talked about a while back about notarization, right? Notary is pretty straightforward, commoditized process, and there needs to be an element of proving that the car is where it is. or
Yeah.
the asset is where it is, or the home is valued what it is. But when you have that, what's not commoditized is linking ecosystems and applications and liquidity to something that's backed of value. So we think that intelligence and assets definitely have a significant overlap. $400 trillion worth of assets are on the table to be tokenized over the next 20 to 30 years, potentially even sooner. 16 trillion in the short term. Obviously you've had a lot of guests on your show talking about RWA lately. We just believe the missing elements really is about intelligence and vibe coded assets, intelligent assets. And that's why we call ourselves the Intelligent Asset Network. So think of us as like the Amazon for assets. That's something an investor called us this week. You guys are Amazon for assets, or your ambition is to do so. Sorry
Yeah.
about that. So yeah, it's an exciting time, and the AI agents are just compounding upon themselves. And then sooner or later, I'm a comic book geek, Jeremy. There's an X-Men. They always talk about this concept of there's the layers of AI. There's the Sentinels, there's the mother mold, and then there's the master mold. And I think we're getting to the point that a master mold is going to get created, where the master mold starts creating open AI systems very rapidly, and those systems start creating AI agents very rapidly. Eventually, they'll start to disseminate in different niche sectors, different asset categories. It's just an exciting time, and obviously to drive social change is the most important thing. That's why we're in this business. We're not here to flip a token, flip a coin, and then go away. We sell to enterprises. We're getting a lot of TVL committed from a lot of different asset managers, real estate, equities, futures, money markets. It's exciting. It's funny. All the assets you can't hold in your hands are the ones that are getting tokenized the soonest, right? So when we thought it was going to be the cool stuff like agriculture, real estate, cars. No, we're talking about enterprise SaaS and cash flows. But anyway, sorry, I know you have a ton more questions. I get excited about that.
It's all good. It's all good. But I'm just impressed that you said you've actually, watched some of our other shows. So that's great. So for people, there's two things. There's the AI, which again, I played around with Talking Eliza back in 1982, I think. So, there was a fledgling AI industry back then, but didn't actually do a lot, and most people didn't interact with it. And most people have had experience just in the last couple of years. And the real world asset is, to me, it's a separate system that you've got working together. And some of our people with older grey hair like myself be familiar with like timeshare. You buy 1/50th of this property and you get to go and stay there 1 week a year. Or you might own half an investment property with someone else that you've put in, or half a business with someone else, and you're entitled to half the profit. But when we start to get into this state of you're talking about ownership of cars, ownership of paintings, ownership of watches, just explain that a little bit for someone who's not familiar with it, and how they can have this optimized portfolio. Because some people aren't aware of watches holding their value through a stock market crash, or paintings that hold value through a market crash.
Right. Yeah, we look at it like three levers, or in old school radio where you have like a tuner in your volume, right? So the tuner and volume on the asset really is about, do you want to hold it in your hand? Do you want it in your possession, or do you want access to it and have that confidence, right? Or are you optimizing for yield? If you're optimizing for yield, when you're talking about equities, you're talking about money markets, you're talking about treasury bills, those may be better off where you're holding yield. But maybe you want to have a little bit of a flex, right? You want to be able to go into a networking room and say, you know what, I own some tokens in exotic car. And this Go system of, this developer created a very dynamic way for a contract to be generated in seconds. And I bought 30% of a Lamborghini. And that smart contract allowed me to literally, I can go up to the driveway anytime I want and do a key fob, and I can drive it on Mondays and Thursdays, right? I can take pictures with it. I can post social media. I can say I own it. I can trade those, right? This specific Lamborghini, there were only 172 created, so it's a very limited supply. And so there's a lot of different aspects and benefits to owning something like that, right? So are you optimizing for yield? Do you want flex rights? Do you just want to have a collection of something? Or, are you doing something initially where you're putting it somewhere on layaway? There is an option in the future to get 100% of those. And at some point you may want to, take yourself into that. Exotic cars may be the not the thing that you want to do, but maybe you do want to tokenize, get yield in enterprise cash flows for a new startup that's a fastest growing AI startup, and they're month over month is doing amazing, right? And they did some revenue-based financing, and you want some of that. It also gives gives you an opportunity to have rights to see what's going on in the company. It gets you to learn. When you own something, you learn, right? So everyone's trying to learn. It's almost like we're in a race for intelligence, right? So the best way to, be vested into something and to learn about it is to hold it in your hand. What about our kids? Kids are still negotiating with only their lunch money, only their allowance, right? And they have to, almost like in like jail, they have to wait till that, like this future time where they're going to get this freedom to own an asset, till they're ideally 18, where they've finally learned enough in society to own an asset. But why not? Why shouldn't that 9-year-old go to fourth grade and say, you know what, I own tokens in this piece of art, in this agriculture? When you own it, you learn more. So we have this theory at Go that the kid that owns probably 2 or 3 different asset classes is probably going to be so much more sophisticated and advanced education wise in learning and in finance than those kids that don't own anything. When you own something, you take care of it. That kid also owns a lot of Pokemon cards, but maybe the kid doesn't own Pokemon cards. He wants to own a fraction of, the world's largest Pokemon collection by his favorite YouTuber. Better. What's better than owning Pokemon cards? Owning that type level Pokemon cards. So that's what we see. It's all about yield, physical access to it, and the smart contracts that are available. And they imagine the possibilities of the generation of contracts that can be created around any asset category as well. So maybe there's like we're talking to a group that wants to tokenize about 150 acres of agriculture in Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
What would happen if you unlock that innovation of agriculture, right? You can build applications around that. You can build maybe Farmville games in Spanish around that, and kids would want to play around that. They would want to go to the farmland. They would want to see what things are being grown there. So just endless opportunities to be able to offer rights, yield, but also just increasing the asset category and supporting your community, right? You can transform a whole city and town once you start opening up something that's been idle and sitting there still for a long time, right? It's almost like we're sitting on blocks of ice, and that ice needs to be melted, and that the water that comes from that melted ice needs to have pathways and rules of where that value can go to. So
yeah, I think it's great. You say, when you own something, you start to learn about it. The person who's out there 8 years old gets their first dog or their cat, and they start to learn about it, read about it, watch YouTube videos about how to train them and that sort of stuff. I remember getting into stocks when I was a teenager. But back then you had to buy a minimum parcel of $500 worth of stock in one stock. Right. Nowadays you can get $5 worth of stock using Robinhood. And obviously back in the olden days, to buy a property, you had to actually have, maybe $100,000 to buy a property. And you had to be 18 years old. Fun thing is, kids, if you're out there and you're 9 years old listening to the podcast, you can buy stocks when you're 9 years old. You can buy crypto when you're 9 years old. Right. There's no age limit on those two. But for those of us going, I like the look of that painting, or I like the look of that car, but there was no possibility of owning it because you'd have to sell everything else you own to get that. So I think this is a fascinating sort of learning experience. And as you said before, it's normally the multimillionaires and the billionaires who they've got their stocks, they've got their crypto, they've got their property, then they start investing in fine art, and then they start investing in jewelry and things like that. Right. But you're talking everybody else can have everything right now, just on a very small scale. So that's one thing, is owning the asset. But for other people, you're talking about tokenizing your assets. Okay, so I've got a 30-year-old classic car in my collection sitting there just doing nothing. I barely drive it. Oftentimes the battery goes flat because I don't drive it often enough, because it's just pretty and fun. How can I tokenize one of my assets?
Yeah, so obviously you're going to need it. When did you buy it? When did you sell it? You need pictures, you need video, you'll need to actuarialize it. We believe that, our chain and others will need to create a new type of gig category, which is sort of like a notary actuary that can have a one-to-many relationship with tokenizing and proving Jeremy's car is where it is and certifying it. When you do a notary online, it's kind of silly. It's like very kind of like commoditized. And so obviously we will enable AI tools and to validate that, but you may want to generate quickly. You want to tokenize it in 2 taps or seconds. And that's what we do. We enable companies and individuals to tokenize their assets in seconds, trade those assets, have a portfolio up. Once you do, you may want to set some rules and say, anyone that owns X amount of these tokens over this period of time is going to have this access rights. They're going to have this yield. They'll be able to drive it at this time, have this type of ownership. They'll be able to take pictures with it as well. They'll be able to do tours whenever you want. You're saying, every single day you'll open up the car and maybe do a live stream from the car or things like that. sky's the limit, and what we're seeing also in not just the car space or, for instance, you're a Boston Terrier, owner. I was a Irish Patterdale Terrier owner. There we go. Right. So you were seeing this renaissance of just what people love, right? And what we need is, like, as AI comes more about, it's killing our own intelligence. But to fight that, we're seeing these business owners and asset owners want to express this renaissance or level of creativity on things. So imagine, like, why dogs? Right? Why do you love your dog? Why did I love my dog? He's not with us anymore. His name was Chewbacca Diaz. But what problems can you solve in the supply chain? Whether it's cars or dogs, there's kennels, there's the industry for feeding the dog, there's the industry for just the end to end. What are the assets that are related to dogs and pets, right? Cities, municipalities, they have a stake in making sure that dogs are not roaming the street. There are a lot of lonely people out there. How do we make sure that dogs are all adopted in every city? There's math to solve that problem, right? And so if you can unlock the assets along the chain, right, and get those assets to be tokenized, imagine solving really complex problems, like solving the dog problem in the world. That would be phenomenal. And, we think that these massive global problems will start to be solved in very, like, micro areas. Like, this town ended homelessness. How did they do that? They leveraged these idle assets in that supply chain. How did all dogs and cats in this one town in Arkansas get all adopted in less than 4 months? We believe it's going to be the intersection of intelligence and getting creative about the assets getting tokenized in that supply chain. There's stakeholders along the way. It's just unoptimized liquidity to support that goal. So that's what we see. And imagine, like, the games, the applications that can, be created around just adopting a dog, playing with the dog, dog owners, social networks around dogs, a social network for dogs just in Australia, right? Like, the level of innovation that could be unlocked. And then the ecosystem itself, it has its own liquidity and funding source that is sustainable and it's regenerative, right? When you look at growing societies, right, it's all about genesis. It's like, what can we create and have a regenerative system, one that's not just taken and then you have to go to a VC model or the equity market to fund it, or the donation model, right? The reason why these massive industries of charities and all of these have been created is because we just have all this value in the earth just locked up, unable to be moved. So now we have technology and now you have societal factors to move it. How much value is left to be unlocked in the world? I don't know. If you and I were aliens and we came here and we wanted to put on planet Earth, we'd probably want to put a bid for $3 to $8 quadrillion for planet Earth, right? So you're seeing chains unlock 250 billion, or the stablecoin market for RWA is 350 billion or 550. That's nothing. You're talking about quadrillions. I never even thought I'd go into 2025 saying the word quadrillion, but that's how much is there. I'm sure you're starting to see decks that say quadrillion on them too as well. But yeah, that's exciting, and it's an exciting time. But that's how we see it with cars. The same type of concept with agriculture, but it's all about what societal problems are we trying to solve, and what kind of smart assets can be created along the way, and what permutations, combinations can be created, from these as well. If you look at quantum technology as well, if you're looking at platforms like Google Circ, right, a quantum platform, no one needs to build a quantum platform, but when you have quantum technology on a planet, in a society, all cards are are on the table, right? Anything's possible at that point. So now we're talking about, how can your car optimize itself according all factors, right? It probably wants to compare itself across all Lamborghinis. It's going to want to compare itself across Lamborghinis over time. And at maybe some point, it's going to notice one point in time that it wants to trade itself, and you should trade itself. And it's going to highly raise its hand and say, listen, if you don't trade me, Jeremy, in the next 3 weeks, you're going to miss out on the next limited collection of Lamborghinis, from there. And how many assets just go unoptimized and are being leveraged by the subjectivity of the owner. Someone that owns so many other assets, they're not able to care for that specific asset, the level of empathy that they should. And it's a very, very valuable asset. So, sorry, we're geeks about this stuff. So that's all we think about. Yeah. Yeah.
So as you know, mate, we have a few ethical funds and we love ethical investing. So some of the things you're talking about, you're not just talking about yield. You're not just talking about, waking up some lazy money that we've got sitting in the garage or in the art room or in the back cupboard.
Right.
You're actually talking about solving world problems. So how important is that to you, and what sort of tools have you got to do that?
I think it's super important, So I started. I lost my father to heart disease. I'm New Rican by way of I'm Puerto Rican by way of New York. So I grew up in Brooklyn. My dad was really hardworking. When he passed away from heart disease, that put a big fire in the belly. And I always just thought about legacy. I thought about access. I thought about learning, and I always felt like everyone should be able to grow wealth, grow legacy. I would view myself more as like a social impact leader. It's trying to solve societal problems. Um, I guess, when you look at what are the biggest core problems in the world and why haven't they been solved, I always come back to like universal basic services, this concept that most of the world is still in suffering, still in survival mode. And is there an economic model that if you were to cover, not universal basic income, obviously there's a big debate on whether that's going to come about based on AI and things like that. We're not really talking about governments or anyone funding universal basic income. But yeah, basic services probably should be covered. And what would happen if most of the basic services in the world were covered, like healthcare? Well, who funds that? Well, the reason why it's so expensive is what had happened, Jeremy, right? You had governments, industries, fiat money from government, so government money, right, get in the way, right? You have these big columns and these big walls between them. And we've never been able to set up a sovereign super state of value that cuts across those things. Now, if you do, then obviously the prices for services come down. And so that's what we're excited about. That's what blockchain brings. It's really a social impact mechanism. And if you did that, right? So let's just take Jeremy, the universal basic services number. If you and I wanted to write a check and we're trillionaires, it would cost us, we'd get no cost slope year over year, but it literally costs us probably like $3 to $5 trillion a year. But hey, that's not bad. That solves a lot of universal basic service for most of the world. But our math shows that if you do a super state across it, and then you're unlocking assets and unlocking those assets across those municipalities and industries and strong community, you can pull universal basic services off for probably about $350 billion a year for the world with a downward cost curve. You're getting compound benefit, right? And we don't think that enough leaders in the world think about it like that, because then they're stuck in their roles. Well, why am I thinking about it that way? Because I'm not a president. I don't want to be mayor. And I don't want to lead a pharmaceutical company. I don't want to lead a Fortune 500 company. But when you are in those industries, you have no choice but to think of your social impact mission in those terms. If you think of your social impact mission in terms of, freedom, sovereignty, value, and then just a total disdain for people suffering. Like I always grew up like in Brooklyn, like my mom was like, if we saw a homeless person on the street, whether you gave them money, and what happened between that money and them going to the store, that's between them and God. Don't judge it. If you have food, give it to them. Give, give, give. One person suffering is not enough. And so that's something my mom and dad always instilled in me. And we think that that's important. We don't tolerate suffering. Like we should not tolerate that level of suffering when there's so much value. I mean, Jeremy, how much flora and fauna and water is in the world? Infinite.
Yeah.
This lie that land is scarce, it's a lie. Water's scarce. Well, most of the planet's water. How do people not have water? Most of the planet's water. Most of the planet has enough greens to feed everyone. So we think hunger is a lie. We think water is a lie. What we mean by that is just there's industry getting in the way of the access, but the stuff is right over there. So anyway, long-winded. Social impact's really important. Yeah, there's a lot of debate about like carbon credits and some of these more esoteric asset classes. There's value there, right? If it's being traded upon, we'll trade it on our chain. But we have this tremendous opportunity to really take out suffering and get people out of survival mode like never before. And so free healthcare, free food, free water, those things are possible. Just got to enable it. So we're really excited. Yeah, we'll be releasing our GSMC coin next month. And pretty modest FDV. We've got great investors. We've got a great community, 42 dApps experiences, 12 really promising startups we like a lot. These days, I think more like a Paul Graham. I have to think like more like a Paul Graham at Y Combinator on like who are the best startups and passionate teams around assets that we can fund. So we write grants to these teams, and there's 5 really good RWA utility tokens that would come out of those 12. So raising an ecosystem fund as well. So we're not just one of these teams. Web3 gets a lot of bad rap of like these young teams that come out and they're like, I just want to flip a coin, make my investors some money and be on with it. Yeah. But no, like we're thinking about things like what should the world look like in 100 years? What should the world look like in 10,000 years? I mean, I think you would agree no matter what we do, probably the world's not going to be around in 10,000 years. I like to think it would be, but at least ask the question, why not? How much time spending doom scrolling? Just put down your phone and ask yourself, what could the world be like if we really had, liquidity and an unlock for all of these idle assets, and we can really trade on value and not be just limited to it not being visible or truthful or immutable. So that kind of drives our thinking.
Yeah. I think like way back in the dark ages, when I was young and naive and had a very narrow worldview. And you think, okay, I've got some money, I can put it in the bank and I can earn 4%, or I can put it in stocks and I can earn 10%, or real estate and earn 10%. And that's kind of the possibilities of how much money I could potentially make with those traditional assets. And one of my friends was a bit more hippy dippy. He'd traveled the world and seen the poor people and this sort of stuff. And he's like, okay, I want to get you involved in this agricultural thing in some third world country. And I'm like, yeah, I donate to that. Like I give money to them. That's what I do. And he's like, no, this is an investment and you can make 100%. And I'm like, that's not possible. That's lies. I know how much I can make potentially. He's like, but you've never been on a farm. You don't know that one grain of rice, one grain of corn planted will grow like 300. And I'm like, one apple planted will grow 300 apples. So by investing into these things, the 100% that I get back was just a fraction of what the farmers got. And obviously, there's things where the farmers can have droughts or famines or floods or whatever that can wipe them out completely. But if they're diversified into other things, they've got enough money to diversify into the assets that I was more familiar with, then that sort of puts this moat around them. And so it just expanded my worldview rather than here's these third world countries that we just give money and basically ignore them and they grow our food. It's like, this can be an investment and I can start to make hundreds and hundreds % return and make the world a better place at the same time. And it was just like, extraordinary.
It's a paradigm shift, right? And then, if you take that paradigm now to where we're going, the agricultural investment, he had to educate you on that, but imagine running the permutations and combinations on a platform like ours to really say the agriculture asset itself is speaking and saying, hey, look, here's the scenarios of what I can make. Here's comparables. Here's the weather situation. Here's the agricultural market in this place. Here's what it's compared to around the world. But don't buy me yet because you're not optimized on these asset classes yet. And based on your age and your risk profile, as good as and alluring it could be, don't buy me yet. I'm better situated for you to buy me. And to have that level of objectivity as opposed to having a good friend of yours tell you, and then next thing you know, you might ruin a friendship because he didn't see a factor coming. He believed in it, but he didn't know that risk factor. And so that's a level of intelligence that we think that the asset itself should have and a portfolio should have. So based on your risk level, based on your yield goals, everyone, we think it'll be a normal thing for everyone to have an expectation for at least a 7 to 17% yield on their whole portfolio at a floor level. Right. And then if you're a little bit younger, you can have portions of your portfolio that's a little bit more risky. And then to be able to compare those, so we think that level is going to bring down anxiety. Like how much stress is based on finances? Am I optimized? Am I doing the right thing? How do I leverage my debt? What's the mix and where am I going? Right. So many people go years and also have cultural stigmatizations about speaking out loud. We're talking about it without anyone in their family, but if their family didn't come from that wealth profile, how do they learn? They go on the internet. So we think that subjectivity needs to go out, and with it was probably going to be a fourth of everyone's anxiety when it comes to finances, right? So, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. You're painting this picture of this beautiful, beautiful world where we can all wake up our lazy assets, make some money. Maybe you've got an old comic book sitting under the bed from 40 years ago that you haven't thrown out, and it's now valuable because everybody else threw out theirs. So how do people get involved? How do people tokenize their assets? What coins do they need? What software do they need? How does it start?
Yeah, for us, some of the bigger players, just to talk about, investors will say, hey, you guys are competing with Ondo or Mantra, or you're competing with these guys, right? And what do we tell investors is like, oh, we are, show me what their application looks like. Can you access it on your phone? Can you tokenize, something like, a coffee cup right now on that platform? And you challenge that investor and they're like, I can't. Actually, I think I got to get them on the phone. I got to talk to them, book a meeting. and stuff. So, for us, we want to make it as simple as 2 taps for less than 30 seconds. You can tokenize any asset, relatively speaking. So we think that the simple, fun, rewarding, sort of like a fun commerce experience like Amazon, eBay, Shopify type experiences. Then another person, called us like, well, the tool set you guys are providing, it's almost like a Shopify for digital assets where applications could be created, these fun experience. Poshmark, go live and showcase your assets and things like that. So for us, web or mobile, chatbot, start uploading your pictures, and that's about it, and then, your assets are tokenized. Nothing magic. Tokenization is commoditized. What's not commoditized is really the marketplace and getting developers that are constantly building applications against those, but not just developers anymore, the everyday person that is creative. So vibe coding, vibe building does not, require a developer or someone to know coding or user experience. So we think that should be drudged out. You see some of the latest platforms like Lovable. Oh my gosh, super powerful platform. A lot of applications and demos are built on Lovable now. No one needs to know how to code. And the record number of 11-year-olds that are building a clone of Twitter in less than 5 minutes is off the roof. So once that gets commoditized, right? What's next? So yeah, we think that tokenizing should be as simple, as fun, and rewarding. And so think about us obviously as like a DEX component, right? If you know Uniswap, SushiSwap, and these DEXs, right? So it's almost like Amazon, having a baby with a Coinbase or a Uniswap. So that's really experience. And then having a builder tool just to build applications end to end. A lot of vibe coding tools are more just Web2 centric. They're not doing the protocols in the back end. They're not doing the blockchain connections. They're not enabling you to connect with the Web3 components, the security aspect. And that's still the nebulous, right? And so if you could take that off the table like we do, we think we're one step closer to vibe coded assets, So yeah.
Okay. So for someone who doesn't code, obviously there's an AI that can actually do the coding for them. Right. But someone with just one asset, maybe it's a comic book, maybe it's an old car, maybe it's an antique piano, maybe it's a painting that's been handed down since World War I or something like that. How do they actually just go? Well, number one, how do they start? Number two, how do you guys make a buck out of it? Because we've got to make sure that you're sustainable, right?
1 to 2% of the assets that we tokenize, we keep. So that's our model. And we think that SaaS subscriptions are dying. We think that CFOs for Fortune 500 companies are exhausted with paying for licenses for software. If you think of the concept, it made sense a long time ago. We don't think it makes sense anymore. So if you have that comic book, say it's Spider-Man issue #1, and that's $1,100 right now, the one that came out in the 90s. I'm a comic book geek, so I know a lot of. Take a picture of it. When was it bought? Do you have it? Take a picture of the back of it. What's the condition of it? And then, 1 to 100 on a daily basis. So we'll have the human element to actually go and validate, like, is this comic book? Who are you? What's your authenticity? And to take out the fraudulent aspect. And just like in real life, something get appraised, there's always an opportunity to be frauded. But once you ask a certain amount of questions, show enough proof, show enough receipts, it is what it is. It's just as good as reality. So, and maybe as a comic book owner, you're interested, you have that for a reason. You're interested in comics, you're interested in Spider-Man, you're interested in superheroes. So being able to trade on that will unlock, social networks and social contexts to connect with other comic book owners as well. And next thing you know, you got 2 people geeking out about Spider-Man and Thor on the website when, so much more fun to talk about contextually the asset than just being on another platform, which is like, I tokenize my asset. Great. Someone's going to buy it. No, they're not, because that's not a marketplace, right? The industry needs marketplace. The industry needs an agentic commerce marketplace where the assets are moving. They're talking almost like every single asset in itself turns into a little bit of a Tamagotchi. Now, the biggest danger is to make sure that those little Tamagotchi assets don't get together, revolt, and start their own town. And next thing you know, bankrupt everyone, right? But that's part of the security. That's obviously making sure that, the protocol is safe to use. And we have to. We distribute through 3 global resellers tied to Salesforce, Microsoft, and Slack, right? These resellers, for these large enterprise organizations have access to 300,000 companies around the world. So I get asked a lot of times, like, hey, Anthony, you're in Web3. Why are you wearing a collared shirt? You look like you're ready to go into a meeting to sell someone. And the answer is yes. We're on the phone all day with asset managers, enterprises. Our protocol goal is to make sure that Microsoft can tokenize their assets and link that to Bitcoin as well through inscriptions and ordinals, which is another, segue of another geeky talk that we can talk about why integrating with Bitcoin is really important. Well, treasuries for Fortune 500 companies, that impetus has already been set. And now you're going to start to see Fortune 500 companies take a stab at holding treasury in ETH and Solana and probably other stablecoins or other, tokens like SUI or maybe even Doge. We see that happening. Well, what's just as important in that is we keep 1% to 2% of the tokens that we help tokenize. Obviously, that we picture those prices will go down eventually, but we think that the days have come and gone where you should be charging like $30 a license, $30 a seat. Like, why? Focus on value, focus on performance, and if we focus on performance, we align incentives. We're providing value that would not have been there otherwise unless you used our service. So we think that is extremely sustainable business model for at least 60 months for us. Maybe the margins get pushed down, but we're not in it for obviously the revenues. Obviously, the more RWA is a flywheel if you set up the ecosystem right, as you know, Jeremy, right? So the more developers, the more builders, the more community, the more companies, the more data, the more TVL. That's the flywheel, and that supersedes cycles, right? That value doesn't go away because it's tethered to reality. So that's the way we see the market. So a lot of people ask us, what is Go? Is Go an L1? Is it a marketplace? Is it a vibe coding building tool? Is it a SocialFi experience where people get to, congregate and do leaderboards and gamification? Yes, it's all of that. Go is really the ethos. Go is the ecosystem. And to be able to manifest becoming the Amazon of assets, these components need to be there, and we're blessed to have built them. That's what we've been doing heads down for quite some time, and we're excited to release our gas coin. And then right behind that are some RWA utility tokens that the community's built. Dubai Ecosystem Fund, we're really excited about that, so we're raising that, aiming to close that by the end of the year. Take that money, invest in the companies building on our chain. We have some discretionary to invest in companies that are anywhere in the spaces or intersection of agentic AI and assets. So we think that this category is beyond a TAM Samsung. We believe it is a societal shift, at its fundamental ground. Of course, every VC is an AI investor now, but we think that the non-obvious is going to be the intersection between value and AI. We're really talking about energy, right? That where that energy goes and gets stored. It's been stored into assets, and now that value of that energy being stored into the assets gets to be compounded and liquefied even more. That's where we see the intersection between intelligence, energy, and AI, right? And energy is stored that way, which obviously the premise of what makes Bitcoin and most cryptos extremely valuable. And
So I'm thinking now, okay, for the average person listening out there, maybe they do have $1,000 comic under the bed. Maybe they've got a car that they only drive half the time. Maybe they've got a few assets sitting around. A few things that might be worth $1,000 here, $1,000 there, not necessarily like a Van Gogh. They could actually list those assets, receive some sort of value for those, and then turn around and say, with that money that I've picked up, I can invest into windmills and solar power and feeding the world and doing these sort of things. So you've got this circular economy where the lazy assets are waking up, getting out there and doing some things that can actually make them money, make the world a better place. And again, you guys have got 1% of that. Obviously, at some stage where I do sell, if someone offers me $2,000 for the $1,000 comic, I'm going to take that after consulting with the AI, of course, and then distribute that cash back to these people. So is it really that simple? Is there any catch to it? What else do we need to know?
No, it is definitely that simple. We think there's other dimensions of value as well. I may want to buy my Spider-Man comic from you versus, someone I don't know, or maybe I want to buy the Spider-Man comic that, a football star has, as well. So there's that social element. There's the element of reputation. There's the element of influence as well that really is important. But from a technical standpoint, user journey, happy path, 1, 2, 3, tokenize your asset in a few seconds, few taps. It is that easy. We think it should be that easy. And we think that there should be all sorts of fun and games built around that. We think it should be extremely fun, leaderboards, competitions, challenges, hearts, coins, stars, gems, all that fun gamification stuff you see in your favorite video game. That should be a part of the platform. And that's what we build. We have a full gamification engine and APIs that we built. We're open sourcing that as well too. We don't believe in keeping our tools, putting them out there. It is that simple. And that's where we think the RWA market is just been at this hype esoteric speech for too long. RWA, RWA, RWA. No. Let's get down to what really matters most. Simple, fun, rewarding. A 9-year-old or an 88-year-old should be able to do this hands down, right?
Yeah.
Trade on their assets. And we think that that same 8-year-old or 88-year-old should be able to prompt or talk value against an asset. And that could be translating into an application, a game, a DApp, an experience, a web page against it, right? Something super creative, or build a new comic book, a new superhero story about the agriculture in Puerto Rico. Or maybe it's the, Ocala, Florida, the equestrian market and racehorse market, which is the intersection of betting. A lot of sheiks and sultans in Dubai own racehorses in Ocala, underpriced real estate. Maybe someone wants to build a horse comic, a horse superhero thing with an application and a really cool, simple 8-bit, maybe betting game against it. And boom, in less than probably minutes, you've unlocked more value in application. Then you socialize that, you vibe build the social aspect of the community, which is community is the last thing that's not going to be commoditized. And we want to enable those community building tools as well for these projects as well. How do you get that equestrian project in Ocala to now have a community size of 500,000 in less than a few weeks authentically? Sustainable users. And if you do, are those sheiks and sultans that own those horses more happy by not? Yeah, because right now no one knew about their horse. And now they're excited because now the ecosystem's growing. And now now Ocala has increased in population 22% in less than 3 years. So that's the level of like social change and impact that we see happening, is that every place around the world has some sort of massive benefit and asset, to it that needs to be unlocked. So yeah, that's what we see happening. But yeah, everyone's sitting on some sort of value or asset. Or if you're not, your portfolio should talk to you and say, hey, look, go learn something. You need to learn more skills. You need to be more disciplined, eat better, right? So we think that portfolio should have suggestions about health, providing value, fighting lethargy. Hey, you need to get into a men's group. You need other people around you that are business leaders to kind of influence you. Maybe you don't need to go to school, but maybe you need to take this course, or maybe you need to get good at AI, or maybe you need to get good at social. So there's an element of if you don't have the assets, that's not a bad thing, but maybe you need to go back into a learning mode, revamp, provide value, and then go get your assets. And then you're going to get this asset. And then you're going to get that SBA loan. That's going to be $500,000. And then you're going to use that to start an AI consulting business. And all of that can be done in less than 3 months. So if you don't have the asset, you have energy, you have time, you have potentially youth, you have health. So those are assets at the end of the day. And then we have a project as well that is a RWA for health and wealth as well. So, owning those tokens will allow you to have medical cost sharing, mental health, telehealth, et cetera. So really good team behind it. We're excited about that project. So yeah, that's where we see it happening. There's so many different types of assets out there that are just ready for tokenization, and it's happening. So hopefully this Thanksgiving, there's a lot more people around the Thanksgiving table that say, hey, I own some tokens in this. I own some tokens. It's not just the cliche, like boring conversations. Just like, I own some XRP. I own some Doge. It's like, yeah, I own some Doge too. Oh man, I sold my Litecoin about 7 years ago. And man, what's it doing now? It's like, no. The conversation could be so much more cooler. They will be so much more cooler. Right. I
mean, and traditionally, and again, sort of going back 20, 30 years, you'd buy a house, the house has gone up in value by 10 or 20%. You go, I've got some equity. I could borrow against my house and I can start to buy the house next door and rent it out, or I can borrow against the equity in my house and I can buy some stocks and shares. But this is like a whole new world. And even, again, for those people who think they don't have any assets because you haven't realized you've got an old Spider-Man comic under the bed, maybe someone who's 88 years old who's sitting on some value, whether it's an old car, an old house, or something. While they're sleeping, that asset is not being used. You can unlock, you can teach them how to unlock that liquidity. And invest it into multiple things. Because obviously, if I took the equity from my house and bought the house next door, that's a risk. Because if the terrorists move in down the block, then both houses have gone down in value. We need to diversify and get into different things. So when the house goes down in value, maybe stocks go up, maybe crypto goes up or something else. But now you're talking about diversifying on a micro scale where you can have 1% of a comic, 1% of a racehorse, 1% of a car, 1% of this. The mind just starts to expand out into the universe and go, holy crap, there is so many trillions and trillions of dollars just sitting there sleeping that could be utilized. Where does
Yes.
this end? Like, where does this sit in 5 years' time?
I think it doesn't, and it becomes a new norm. It's almost like we all become these micro pools of liquidity or micro banks, and banks become, but banks will find a way. And hopefully, banks, as you're seeing, they're becoming more crypto friendly, so they will partake in this, and there's going to be value. But at the end of the day, we're all banks. That's in 5 years. We're all little micro banks, and instead of the 13-year-old having to go with a lawnmower and do a lemonade stand, all the stuff that you and I did as little entrepreneurs as teenagers, right? Then that 13-year-old is going to the Mrs. Ferguson's house and she's 88, and then that 13-year-old's like, you know what? Let me tokenize the two cars in the back there. Let me tokenize a little part of your house, and let me tokenize some of these antiques here. And all I want is 5 to 10% or whatever you want to give me. And then he goes down to Mrs. Smith's house and she's 72, and then he keeps going, right? So the opportunities are probably endless. And then he's putting those on his social profile. And then the town has realized, like, oh my gosh, Miss Ferguson, I didn't know she needed money. Like, I'll buy that location. And just the fact that it was listed on little Timmy's, page, and Timmy's 13. What'd you do this summer, Timmy? I made $74,000. That's 5 years from now. That's 5 years from now, definitely. And so we think, like, we're big fans of like stuff that's going on with like World Liberty Finance and some of this concept of like getting the bank out of the way. You should be able to refinance your things every single time you have a $10,000 or $20,000 thing or house. Shouldn't have to go to the bank and then fill out the form and then talk to someone. It's just like, what are we talking about? Like, let me just liquefy this and like get these tokens and get this money, and then I can divest from there. And so the level of dynamism, it's, obviously every finance and banking term is all based on water, liquidity, bank, I mean, these
Currency.
are all water terms, currency, currents, everything should be water. Most of our body's water. So, we've just fallen society wise out of that flow of water, that flow, right? So 5 years from now, it's just value is flowing, and it doesn't require that middleman. Yeah.
I love it. We're starting to get sort of all esoteric and spiritual, but I'm just thinking, like, when I was 13, like I was too young to work legally, but my mum wanted me out of the house.
Yeah.
So I would go and paint the neighbor's fence. And then after a while, like somebody would tell somebody, and I had a little fledgling career there, and I started babysitting, and someone would tell someone. But I certainly wasn't making $74,000. I certainly wasn't getting a share of any of the equity when I improved the value of that house by painting it. But I love this, mate. We are all banks. That's going to be the quote. So again, people want to get started. They just go to GoSmartChain.AI. They sign up. They put all their assets on there, and they start moving the money around.
That's correct. Yeah. So we're on testnet right now. So everything we do is simulating, right? So we're not on mainnet yet. Our testnet is called Lysa, and Leo mainnet is coming soon next month. And then you'll be able to fully do that and everything. We're finalizing the licenses, and you know how that all goes. You've had people many times in your show explain the licensing side of RWA, so I don't need to repeat that. So yeah, right now, just come to testnet, use our application, play with the bot, check in every single day, tell your community about what's going on. And then, our major customer right now is getting institution, the asset managers, ideally the BlackRocks, Vanguard, State Streets to commit. So we, most of our days and times is just the flywheel all starts with the most assets committed. So we have 50 million now of committed assets. Probably Tuesday we'll have 58. So that's a blessing. But our goal is 500 million. So we have a nice pipeline of different assets. But yeah, if you're listening to this, just come to GoSmartChain.AI. Upper right-hand corner, you should be able to check in and just come to our application. You come to Telegram as well. Follow us, come to our Twitter, all of that good stuff. Come to our Telegram, our Discord, and tell more people about. So we're rewarding people in GSMC on testnet for referrals. So the more that you refer, the better. The more asset managers you refer, the better. That's what it's all about. We're just excited to set the tone for the ecosystem. We think the asset market has really been needing innovation, but the simple things, simple, fun, rewarding experiences. And then we also have a developer program, validator program. We have ambassador programs. And then we have an enterprise distribution arm as well, too. A lot of Web3 teams that are very young, they kind of sway away. They want to go on Zoom calls with a paper bag over their head or not turn on their camera. So we're pretty out there. So it's really important that we cater to enterprises as well. So we want our protocol everywhere, and companies using it. We want the developers at company and the creative people at company building applications against the intellectual property they're going to tokenize and things like that. So we have some exciting projects brewing. We've got a music project, asset project, health and wealth project. These are powerful, brilliant teams. And so these days, it's, we're just looking for great, brilliant teams as well, passionate people. It doesn't matter what age, where you come from. If you know about an asset or you have a great experience, we'll link you to an asset. We got assets that need innovation unlocked against them too. So love that matchmaking element of my job. So yeah.
And you'd need a lot of specialists because we're talking about racehorses and agriculture and different industries and oil paintings and all sorts of things. So obviously you're looking for anyone who's a specialist in any area or who's passionate about those areas. And obviously if you're listening to this podcast and you're 30, 50, 80 years old, share it with a 13-year-old. We want these guys to be actually out there moving the flow, getting these assets, waking up, changing the world, making money. And just getting the flow. I love that water analogy. It's beautiful, and as you say, it fits in with all the banking. We are all banks, so everyone visit GoSmartChain.AI. And Anthony Diaz, thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to have another chat, probably not recorded. We'll get into the more spiritual aspect of that, but
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Really looking forward to what you guys create, and good luck with it all. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the show and what you do. Really appreciate your work, Jeremy. Yeah, great stuff.
Cheers.